before I get into the project, I just wanted to make comment about how this project works and what's involved in terms of people power. The project is basically a collection of right now it's over 450 people. And I collectively call that, citizen science. How many people in here have a passion for some kind of natural resource? Butterflies, bees, bugs, whatever. Okay. And how many of you have actually participated using your passion and knowledge to support projects similar to what I'm going to talk about tonight? So yeah, okay, good. So you know what citizen science is all about. And it's a collective effort. It's an opportunity for us as human beings to relate to the natural resource and do something for it, along with the passions that we have. So that was the basis of me starting the project 19 years ago, is to get people involved in understanding the life cycles of birds of prey. And this is where we are today. So I'm going to go ahead and switch here. Okay. So back now into the project. I have several goals here, and you can see them up on the screen. The first three, you'll notice, involve the birds themselves. We count them. We use a fairly simple survey method so that everybody can do it easily. And we try and use the data to reveal density and distribution patterns of the various species that we count. And we've counted 31 species of birds over the course of the 19 years that we've been doing this. The other three are pretty much people-oriented, if you'll see that. We provide monthly survey results to volunteers, and what that means is I collate all of the information that comes in from the various routes all around the project. They come into my computer, and I collate them into one great, big, huge Excel chart. It's a monster. And that information then gets distributed to all the volunteers after I get it completed. Right now, I'm doing the one for November, and hopefully we'll get that out by the end of this weekend. Part of the effort with that involves responding and keeping in contact with all of the volunteers. When they submit their data, I check it over, make sure it's all accurate, and then I'll email each person back and thank you for their efforts and point out any interesting things that might have shown up on the survey. But the contact is what's important. And part of that goal of being in contact with people throughout the project is to try and retain as many people as I can for the project. And we've got over almost 540 routes now, counting the ones that I'll tell you about a little bit. And if any of you have done this kind of work before, it's important in order for understanding trends of wildlife to get a consistency in the way that the data is collected. And so, for example, if you have a route that has, and over a course of 10 years, you have 10 different people doing the route versus one person doing it over 10 years, the data that you collect by one person is a lot more meaningful than collecting them individually from 10 different people, because you've got a certain way of doing the surveys and seeing the birds and that type of thing built into the data set. And when you have multiple people doing it, it's a little bit tougher. But so I encourage retention by constantly being in contact with people. My wife, Sue, will tell you how much time I spend on the computer every day. It's like about 8 hours a day. But it's important. It's not only important to make sure that the people are happy doing the job, but it's important for me in terms of maintaining stability in the project. We have a survey protocol in place. It's pretty simple. We require that, or we ask the volunteers to do once a month surveys for the wintering period December through February. Some people like to do more, so we can also allow them to do surveys in November and March. November and March are kind of still migrational periods, and this is a wintering project, but it acts as good bookends to the wintering numbers. And they can also do multiple surveys during a given month if they wish to. I have several people that do that, but mostly we ask them to do one survey a month. They can choose the days that they want to based on their own life schedule for that month, and then hopefully work around really bad weather. Some projects like this have been set up to do a survey on a specific day of a month. And if Mama Nature says, I'm going to snowstorm on you, or I'm going to give you a lot of rain that day, the results that you're going to get under those circumstances are a little bit skewed, because birds are going to be hiding. They're going to be trying to maintain the calories in their bodies. They don't want to be out in the open wasting energy. People that are involved need to be comfortable with Raptor ID. Binoculars are required pretty much, but spotting scopes are a real plus if you have them, but that's not required. They're expensive. We like to do surveys during the good weather. Survey speeds while you're driving the course route should be set so that you can thoroughly observe habitat as you're going, looking for birds. Go through it too fast, you're going to miss birds, and as a result, you're not going to gain the maximum effort or out of your maximum number of birds out of your effort. All birds in this project are recorded. I have lots of different categories for birds that are either unidentifiable or unidentifiable for the different families of birds that we have. I'll show you a chart here in a minute that explains that. And safety is obviously number one goal in our project. We haven't had an accident. We've had over 1 million miles worth of driving. So it's really helpful to be safe.
I'm going to have you switch to this mic.
Okay. That going to work now?
Let's try it.
Okay. Is that better?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Was it scratching?
A little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the fun parts of my job when I look at a new area to put a route in play is I do the old-fashioned way. I'm not really good on computers, but I have an Atlas gazetteer that I take photocopies of the areas and paste them all together. And so I got a big area. And this, for example, the one I'm showing here is what I did 3 years ago when I took the project into Spokane. This shows you the grid work of all of the routes that I put in play that first year. There's been more added since that, but this gives you an idea of how I look at it. I use that for the road system, and I also use Google Maps aerial photos on the computer so that I can see things like condition of road, whether it's mud or dirt or paved, to see if any of the roads are lined with power lines, which are good perch points for birds. And just by going through that, I've created maps like this, which you see. And one of the important things is when I finally find a person that does a new route, I usually have them supply me with information that they know about birds of prey in that particular area. And because when I'm just looking at it on the computer, and I'm looking at summer pictures, not winter pictures. So it's a big difference. But I get the input from the volunteer for that first year. And what that'll do is that'll help us fashion a final route by the end of the first year that then we can solidify and use going forward in future years. And that way we can compare data. Each route has what I call a data form. And this is an example. It shows you on the left side each road segment in the route, and then across the grid there are the different columns for the different species that are apt to be seen in that area. You'll see that, for example, over on the right-hand side, there's falcons, buteos, and owls. I try to make it easy for the volunteer by not having a whole bunch of paperwork to handle in the car. And so I boil it down to one page as much as I can. And for the birds that we don't see that much, you don't see too many falcons, you don't see too many accipiters, you don't see too many owls, but you do see them. And so there's a spot on the form for them. They just have to fill in the species codes that you see like under falcon and under owls there. But these are unique to each route. They're based on what we saw back here on this grid. And that way we can keep track not only of the numbers, but the form will show you the distribution of the birds throughout the route. And that can come into play if, for example, you have habitat changes. Maybe you have an agricultural field that changes from perennial grass to hazelnuts, which is happening here in the valley. Those changes you can see on these forms as you compare from month to month and year to year. Now, when we talked about earlier about citizen science, this page here is, or slide is kind of an indicator of how much effort is put into this project. Through last winter, we had 15,875 surveys done out of a possible 21,017 for a little over 75%. For the period that covers November through March. For the actual primary survey period, we had almost 89% coverage. So what that tells me is that we have a very engaging group of people. And it's awesome to work with those kind of people. They're just very happy to get out and do the work and get us the results. You'll see on here that after 18 years, we've racked up 67,000, almost 68,000 miles of survey hours. And that's just for one person. That's just for the driver. A lot of times we have people that'll take 2 or 3 people along with them. And I don't keep track of that because that fluctuates, but I know it has to be driven by at least one person. So that's a minimum number of survey hours. That's a bunch of volunteer hours right there. We have an average size of a route of about 67 miles, which take about a little bit more than 4 hours to cover. I kind of use, when I get new people involved and they ask, well, how long is it supposed to take? I said, well, judging from the past data that we have, if you go about 15 miles, if it averages about 15 miles from the time that you spend, that is an indicator that you've done well surveying the habitat for birds. If you go any faster, like I said earlier, it's you don't get to see as many birds if you're not going slow. And mentioned earlier, we have had over 1 million miles of driving now. Hit that last winter. That's like 42 and a half trips around the Earth, 2.2 round trips to the moon. Put a lot of effort into this. Okay, so let's get into the history of how the project started. As August pointed out, I have had a lot of experience in my background working with the Fish and Wildlife Service on refuges. And we did a lot of survey work. And when I was formulating this project in my mind for a couple of years, I was thinking, if I get people involved in this, I want to do it in an easy way so that people don't get discouraged. So before I did that, I started doing these surveys on my own. And what you see here is the 4 routes that I put together around Albany that I surveyed December, January, and February, those first 2 years. And what I would do is I would publicize the results on OBOL, which is Oregon Birders Online, it's a birding listserv here in Oregon. And found out that there was a lot of people out there that were interested in the data and interested in what I was doing. So the first 2 years I did it myself. And I got people that really were serious about wanting to do routes themselves in the surrounding area. Dan Hirely was one of them. Thank you, Dan. And John Sullivan, if you know John Sullivan, he's another one. But I added another little bunch of routes here in the valley, as you can see in red. And then after the second year, a fellow by the name of Chuck Gates, who at the time was president of the East Cascades Bird Conservancy before it became East Cascades Audubon Society. He was monitoring my reports on Opal, and he contacted me one day and he says, "Hey, Jeff, why don't you help me set up some routes over here by Bend and Redmond?" And so that third winter, when I expanded it here in the valley, I also built those routes there that you see over by Bend. And together, collectively, it was amassing quite a bit of data. And of course, it was all getting published on Opal, and it just generated more interest. So at that point, at the end of this third year, I was thinking, okay, if I'm gonna do something big with this, I'm gonna have to make a commitment. And so I did. And that summer, after this third winter here, what I used primarily at the time was volunteers that participated in the Christmas bird counts around the state. What I did was I contacted all of the circle coordinators and to see if they would be interested in doing a route in their area, or if they weren't, or if they wanted to and they wanted other people involved, they could get some of the membership to pick up routes. So that was the primary source of getting the routes for the first year of the project. And at the end of the summer, I had added 56 routes over the basic ones that I had done, and came up with a total of 79 routes all around the state. And I was pretty happy about that. That was the first time I really kind of coordinated something like that in a big way. And it was quite successful. So over the next 6 years, we added another 69 routes. So at the end of March of 2011, we had 148 routes in the project, pretty much all in Oregon. And this was by design, because this was supposed to be an Oregon-based project. And when I got to this point, I said, well, there's a lot of other areas in the Northwest besides Oregon. And so I said, I'm going to go ahead and take this into Idaho. So that first year, we added 31 routes. And this was kind of just a test to see if I could do it, if people would respond to it. And so we added a bunch of them around Boise, and I hit a couple up in the Panhandle there and one over on the east side. And then I also expanded it a little bit and added a few along the Washington side of the Columbia River. And then I finished up the Klamath Basin by doing the California portions of the refuges down there. So that led to adding another 132 routes over the next 7 years, and still adding more routes in Oregon and starting to filter up a little bit into Washington, not much, but basically trying to fill in Idaho. That was my goal. And one of the things, I don't know whether you saw it on that citizen science list of items there earlier, but one of the things that I tapped quite successfully was a program called the Idaho Master Naturalist Program. And what that is it's a kind of a formalized training program put on by Idaho Fish and Game to train people to do survey work for various agencies. And when I tapped into that, I started filling routes. I mean, it was amazing how receptive that organization was to wanting to participate in the project. And it was an ends to justify the means for what they were studying. And it was a perfect match. So after being involved here in Idaho and a little piece of Washington, at the end of the 18-19 season, we had 311 routes. And so I'm looking at my map, and I'm looking at this great big hole up here in Washington with nothing in it. And I said, do I really want to commit more time and energy to this? And I said, yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. So that first year, I added 81 routes into Washington. And of course, I added some more down in the southeast corner of Idaho, and a few more up along the river in the western part of the Columbia. But it was primarily trying to focus on the eastern half of Washington. And I thought that was pretty good, but it wasn't enough. Because the next year, I thought, okay, let's move it into Southwest Washington and fill up some more in Eastern Washington. So we added another 60 routes. So now we're up to 452 routes at the end of 2021 season. And as you can see there, and I even dipped down, if you can see down in the lower right-hand corner, down in Utah, I put 3 routes down there. So this whole expansion process, the only way this happens, the only way that it happens is through citizen involvement. It's the only way. And once you get a project like this rolling, it kind of feeds on itself, and it gets more people involved, and more people start contacting me to want to, be a part of the experience. And that's just a win for me when I want to add more routes. So at the end of that year, we had 452. And then last winter, you can see that void up there in the northwest corner of Washington. I went ahead and filled that too, plus some more areas in central Washington, plus some more areas in Idaho, plus some more areas in California. So 60 more routes were added. And at the end of last year, we had 512 routes in 6 states, because I started adding them in Montana. You can see right next to the Gyrfalcon picture there, those 3 routes there in Montana. So that's quite a load of people, a lot of work, a lot of birds, a lot of reporting effort, but it wasn't enough. So this year, I've already added 24, and that's actually gone up to 29 now. I made this a couple of days ago. I'm starting to fill in Montana, Western Montana. I put in 22 routes in Montana, and there's been 7 more in Washington and Idaho. But most of the effort's been in Montana. We've got a few of these. This map was made several weeks ago, and I did most of the work for Montana here in the last week and a half. So now we're up to almost 540 routes. And I think I'm getting to the limit of what I can work myself. But we'll see. If I can get through this year and this winter and everything goes smoothly, who knows? We'll see where else we can go with it. But the idea here is that with the help of over 450 people now reporting data back to me every month, that's a humongous effort. It really is. And I'm happy that I've tapped into a lot of people that have the same interest that I did when I started it. That first year we had 79 routes. Now we have 540 routes. So it's 7 times as big now. Okay, let's get into some pictures here. This is the gallery of species that we've managed to find on our surveys over the last 18 years. That top row is what we call the Buteo group. From left to right, it would be red-tails, rough-legged hawks, red-shouldered hawk, Ferrugin's hawk, Swainson's hawk, and one lone zone-tailed hawk, and I'll tell you about that later. The next row has falcons and eagles on it. From left to right, it's American kestrel, merlin, peregrine falcon, prairie falcon, gyrfalcon, and of course, bald golden eagles. The third row is from left to right, Cooper's hawk, sharp-chinned hawk, and goshawk for the accipiter group. And then some extra birds like the white-tailed kite, and northern harrier, and osprey. And then the final two rows are the owls that we've recorded. Great horn, barn, burrowing owl, short-eared owl, long-eared owl, northern pygmy owl on the top line, and on the bottom line, western screech owl, barred owl, great gray owl, snowy owl, northern hawk owl, and northern saw-whet owl. And in the upper right-hand corner is the one that just got away. It just got away. It was the crested caracara that hung around south of Corvallis about 7 years ago, something like that. It was on a route, and I was really wanting to get into the database, but it was during March, and the person that normally does that route had a bunch of commitments and couldn't do the survey. I threatened to come over from Albany, but I didn't do it. I knew it was there. We've got it documented, so I'll talk a little bit about him at the end of the program. So, of all the species that we have in the project, these 5 birds, bald eagle, American kestrel, rough-legged hawk, red-tailed hawk, and northern harrier, I call them the big 5 because they make up more than 90% of all of the birds that are counted in this project. Over the 18 years, red-tailed hawk is consistently coming in at between 45 and 47% of the total birds counted. American kestrel's next at 21, 22%. Harriers and rough-leggeds are somewhere in the 6 to 7% range. And the bald eagles, they're kind of they're interesting because they start off slow, but they get big. And I'll tell you why when we get to that point. Okay, I'll go through the first 5, the big 5 first, and give you some specific information about numbers, and we'll see where that leads to. There's the red-tailed hawk, the #1 guy in the program, almost 50%, 47% or so. This chart here shows you last year we had 16 routes that had more than 100 birds counted on a survey. So they're quite prolific. All but 3 routes in the project through last year had a red-tailed hawk counted on it. These are the top 10 routes last year that had the most birds. And you can see in that first column, that's the number that was the peak number of birds over a 3-month period, December through February, that were counted on those routes. And 3 of them happened to be record numbers. That's the red. And you can see on the right-hand column, actual peak number records for each one of those routes over the course of 18 years. Before I go into too much more of the numbers, I want to alert you to something. 6 years ago, I had a fellow in Idaho who was interested in doing a route for me over there. So I got him set up for a route. And at first, I didn't know who he was. But then through the course of the winter, he told me who he was. He's the main research biologist on the Peregrine Fund's staff there in Boise, Idaho. And so he wanted to get a feel for the project because after that winter was over, he came to me and he said, "Hey, how much data do you have?" And I said, "Oh, I have plenty of data for you. I have 16, no, at that time it was 15 years of data." And so he says, "Whoa." I said, "Yeah, this is a pretty big project and we've got a lot of information." He says, "Do you mind if we have it?" And I had been looking for a place other than in my computer to get this data to somebody who could use it. And it took that long, but I finally found the right place for it to go. So ever since that year, I gave him all the back data for the first 14 or 15 years. And then ever since, every year at the end of the year, I give him the data that we collect that year, that winter. And the Peregrine Fund has they are developing an international database of birds of prey around the world. And one of the things that was intriguing to Chris was that they didn't have that much data for wintering birds of prey in the Northwest. And this just fell right into his lap. And so it's been a real good cooperative effort with them. And just recently here, they submitted a paper on a statistical analysis of our data. And so they wrote a paper and submitted it. It hasn't been approved yet, but once it does, we're going to go ahead and put that on the ECAS website so that people can understand the value of what we've been doing. And that's the bottom line, really. So the Peregrine Fund has been a real helpful part of this project. Now, about 6 years ago, I had a gentleman that was a member of the ECAS Audubon Society over there, who was versed in GIS. And another thing that I had always wanted and I had no skill for was to do exactly what you see on the screen here. What he was able to do is take my Excel charts for these various species and create visuals. And from what that shows, this shows density and distribution, basically, of what we were after at the beginning. And so the bigger the circle, the more birds. The biggest circles have at least 150 birds counted on a survey. And this is in December 19. And what's valuable here is that you can look at it the next month and watch the circles. See how they change? Birds shift and they change places and they disappear sometimes. The numbers go down. But the idea here is to be able to portray visually what we collect, in our data. And so we were starting to do these kind of maps, but then Kevin said, "Hey, I got a better way of doing this." And so what we did was we started up what's called an infinity database. And all of the data that's been collected in the last 2 years has gone into that database. And next summer, my target for my time off season is going to be inputting the data that we've collected over the last 16 years and put it into that infinity database. And once that thing is whole, then we can really start playing with numbers. We can play with maps like this. We can do charts, we can do anything we want to do. Any way we want to portray the data, we'll be able to do that with that infinity base. So looking forward to getting everything similar to what the Peregrine Fund was doing. But what we're wanting to do here is to be able to put this information on the website, the ECAS website, so that I can tell people where to go to see things. For example, if you want to go see red-tailed hawks, you can see on the map here the best places to go to see them. Likewise, if you wanted to go see red-shouldered hawks or any of the species, we'll have maps available to similar to this to be able to point the way for people who recreationally want to go see them, or if they want to study them, they can see the numbers and the distribution. Red tails are named for obvious reasons. This is a nice adult on the left. The bird on the right was a picture that I wanted to show some of the general field marks that you can pick up on right away that will tell you that it's a red-tailed hawk. They usually have a pretty much dark hood with a line along the neck region there, separating it from a white chest. And it usually has some kind of a band system across the lower belly there, like that. On the underside, in addition to what you see on the right-hand side, you see the back, and I'll point something out to you in a minute. But on the left-hand side, you see these. Can't. Okay. We don't have a. No good, right? Okay. All right. Well, anyway, in the wrist area, the front leading edge of the red-tailed hawk is usually in black. On the right-handed picture, you can see a faint V formation on the back, a white V kind of as he's landing. That comes in handy when you're looking at birds at a distance and you're only seeing the back, you don't see the front. And this picture is kind of an example here. You can see the birds that are on top of the wheel line here, and you can see the noticeable white V's on those perched birds there. And of course, there's one that's facing you. You can see the dark hood and the white chest and the belly band. So those are things that help us determine what it is when you're doing the surveys. Red-tailed hawks are notorious for coming in all different colored phases. They're crazy. The two on the left here are obviously dark phase birds. You can still see though the neck delineation there between the head and the darker white area, but you still see the red tail on that bird perched looking away from us. So it's definitely red tails. And then you got the really light colored ones. John, I don't know where John took that picture, but it's a great picture of a really light red-tailed hawk. And of course, they're birds of prey. So I have a few pictures here of different kinds of things that red tails eat. Rabbits, snakes on the right. And that center picture, it's a weasel of all things. He's carrying a weasel that he caught, one predator to another. And then, you know, when we're doing these surveys, invariably during the winter, we come across interactions between different birds of prey. And for some odd reason, red-tailed hawks always seem to be in the middle of everything. I don't know why, but they just do. This picture here shows a northern harrier male trying to create some dominance over the red tail. And you'll notice that in the upper left-hand corner, when they first engage, the red-tailed hawk's belly is ground down towards the ground. And as the bird approaches, he starts flipping up. And in the bottom picture, he's exposing his weapons, basically. They don't fight with their beak. They fight with their feet. And very strong grip, very sharp talons. And if they were to fight with their beaks and break a beak off, guess what? They won't be able to eat. And so they're really, really focusing on the feet as weapons. Same thing with this one here. When he got too close to a peregrine falcon nest over in Central Oregon, you notice how in the center picture, that red tail's completely flipped up and he's exposing his talons to the attacker. Now, the next bird in the big five is American kestrel. And they are quite numerous here in the valley. You look at that list of let's see, what is it, 5, 10, 12 routes there. Out of 17, we'll have more than 50 birds on account. If you look at them, only 2 of them are not in the Willamette Valley. We got Lane County, Polk County, Yamhill County, Lane County, Marion County, Benton County, all represented. And that's one of the things that has been amazing to me looking at the data that we've collected, is that there are so many kestrels in this valley. It's pretty cool to drive a route and see, like, for example, last year, that Lynn Unit 3 route at the top and Lynn Unit 4 route, those are my routes. And that's what I was able to see, just kestrels, not just kestrels, no other birds they added. I can usually see 400 to 500 birds on each one of those routes during a survey. Lots of birds in the valley. Kestrels are one of 2 species that have different plumages for male and female. And here you have males on the left and females on the right. You can notice the males are brighter colored and the males are more drabby. That's by design, that's natural. It's a protection for nesting primarily. If any of you have driven around the valley before, favorite hunting perches for kestrels are wires. And this is just an example of what what you can expect to see. They also hover hunt, which means that they can actually expand their hunting territory. They'll go out in the middle of a field and they'll just hover like this until they see something, and then they dive for it. So yeah, they're very adaptive to habitat differences. Whereas red-tailed hawks, they need a perch site. And so if we're losing trees, or we're losing fence poles, or we're losing power lines, that makes the fields less susceptible to hunting for red-tailed hawks. American kestrels have a variety of diet. Upper left is a bird. It is a falcon, so it can catch birds. The lower left is a dragonfly. The middle one's a snake. Two on the right are the more common prey, the voles that are in the valley here. The other species of raptor that has different colors for the sexes are the northern harriers. Male on the right, female on the left. And they're clicking in at about 94% of all the routes. They're very common. And you can see from this list that there's quite a variance of where peak numbers are. They're spread out throughout the project: Washington, Idaho, California, Oregon. Male on the picture, male is the picture on the top, females on the bottom. On the female, you can see the white tail base. That's very distinctive on birds out in the field, and that's a key characteristic to look for when you're wanting to determine it to be a northern harrier. These are the males. They're people have a tendency to call them gray ghosts. They are kind of cool birds. But harriers are kind of unique in that they have facial discs, almost like owls. And on these three pictures, you can kind of see where that is. The females are brown. You can see on the one on the right there, that facial disc shows up pretty easily. Juveniles are even a different color plumage. They're more of a coppery brown color. They morph into the female and male colors second year. And then bald eagle is another one of the top 5. This is a killer picture. I love this. Yeah, I failed to mention earlier in the beginning when we were talking about citizen science participation. When I first put a PowerPoint presentation together for the project, I kept getting pictures like this from a lot of project participants. There's a lot of good photographers in the group. And so I thought, okay, if I'm going to do this about the project, I should ask these guys and gals if I could have some of their pictures to use in the presentation. And so I got a flood, I mean an actual flood of pictures by probably close to 60 people. And so that's what I use in these presentations. Most of the pictures are taken by project participants. I do have some that couldn't supply me the pictures that I wanted, that I have a few photographer friends that have been able to fill the void, but most of them are from project participants. And here's another pretty cool thing about bald eagles. You see in this list here, you've got representation everywhere for eagles. I'm going to show you a picture next here of what I mean. Northwest Washington, South Central Oregon, eastern or mid portion of the Snake River Valley in Idaho, here in Lane County, out on the Sequim Dungeness area and northwest corner of Washington, and so forth. Central Valley, Silver Lake Valley Falls area, Agency Fort Klamath down in the basin. Yeah, eagles have done really well since we stopped DDT. Just these 14 routes here, those numbers from last winter, that first column, they add up to 1,770 birds. That's a good number of eagles. It really is. And of course, there's a lot more that are on the other almost 500 routes in the project. This is a favorite shot of mine. I like this. This was photographed by a friend of mine. And it just kind of gives you an idea of what prey or what intruders are up against when you get an eagle that's really ticked off. He's really good at it. Yeah, and this is the picture I was referring to. On here, you'll see different big circles scattered, along the Columbia River. Obviously, they're after fish. Here in the Willamette Valley, their primary diet, believe it or not, is dead sheep. Over in some of the areas in the east side of the mountains, you have calving operations. You have waterfowl, like down in the Klamath Basin. And this is kind of a representation of what you can expect for them to eat. They'll go after anything. They're tough hunters, they really are. But they are also scavengers, and they'll clean up whatever is out there to eat. And that's basically what they're doing with the sheep here in the valley. They, a lot of sheep die from foot rot, and cold, wet winter months do a number on them, and it's not uncommon when you have a carcass like that. I can count maybe 10, 12, 14 eagles around that carcass. So it's a major food source. Of course, things like on the beach wash up, they're scavenging that. The one in the upper right-hand corner is a bird that killed a goose. Lower left is a fish hunter. They have a variety of diet. Over in Idaho, I have a couple that lives along the Clearwater River. And these next 4 pictures are going to show you what eagles do when there's a deer carcass available to eat off of. He lives right along a main highway, and there's roadkill that he's got permission from the state getting people to haul down to the river. And he takes photographs. Here's the photographs. This is amazing. When he sent me those, I just about dropped out of my chair. It's pretty cool. Okay, and then the last of the big 5 is the rough-legged hawk. They come in at about 7%, like I said earlier. Pretty distinctive marks. These 2 black patterns in the wrist area are indicative, along with a big, broad white tail band, base of the tail feathers across there. The body can be different color patterns of black and white, depending on age and sex. But we do have them here in the valley, but most of them are over on the east side of the Cascades. And one of the things that I've enjoyed seeing with all the routes that are in the project is some hellacious numbers. And these rough-legged hawks, they come from the tundra. They're not a breeder here in Oregon or Washington. And as such, when they show up in big numbers, it's really impressive. That Mud Lake Hamer area over in northeastern Idaho is just phenomenal. The Howe area is just a little west. These 3 routes there, actually Ellis and Ellis Goldberg route 2 on the bottom. Those 4 routes sit right at the bottom of the north-south mountain ranges in Idaho before it starts dropping into the Snake River Plain. And they all like to congregate in that area for some odd reason. But this guy found 363 rough-legged hawks on one count last winter. Give you an idea of the difference. I think the highest count that we have for rough-leggeds in Oregon is around 75. So these big numbers are pretty impressive. Didn't advance. Something's going on here. It's not advancing. Here. Okay, there we go. Good, thanks. When they're in the valley here and I'm doing counts, this picture that John took on the left here is pretty indicative of how they are seen. They like to perch on tops of small limbs, on tops of bushes and small trees. Red-tailed hawks need something a little bit more substantive to grab onto. These guys can do that. And when I see a bird up there, I'm thinking first thing rough-legged hawk. Then I put the scope on it to make sure. But that's a pretty common way of seeing them. They come in a couple different color phases, light and dark. And the dark phase, there aren't that many maybe 1 or 2% of the population is dark phase. When you see one of those things for the first time, you just say, what is that? I happened to experience that a couple of years back on one of the routes, and the thing flew right in front of me, and I saw that and it looked just like that. And I go, whoa. You get to see some really cool stuff on these projects, on these surveys. And an interesting thing about rough-legged hawks is they're not perch hunters. They hover hunt just like kestrels do. So when you see a great big bird out in the middle of the field, stationary and flapping his wings up and down, looking down, it's going to be probably a rough-legged hawk, unless there's a little wind blowing, and red-tailed hawks can stay up afloat with that. But these guys are built this way because they come from the tundra, and there are no trees up in the tundra. So they've adapted to this style of hunting, and it's pretty impressive to watch. And we got golden eagles. We got about 59% of those routes have had golden eagles on them. Powerful bird, mostly over on the east side of the mountains. We do have them here in the valley. There's some that are seen down in around Roseburg and Grants Pass and Medford, but primarily east of the Cascades. Here's a kind of an interesting shot of a bird. This is up on the Ellis-Goldberg route in Idaho. You can see why they call them golden eagles. They have beautiful feathers around their head. Juveniles are marked with a great big white tail band. They're all dark. You can see this one here is kind of developing a pattern, color difference on its head, getting a little lighter. But when you see them from below, you can tell the difference right away between an adult and a juvenile. The juvenile has not only the white tail band, but it also has those white wing windows, we call them. Adults are pretty much all uniform dark brown. Ferruginous hawk is a gorgeous hawk from the east side of the mountains, very colorful, big, strong bird. They have a couple different, they can be dark, they can be light, as these pictures show. The pair that you see on the left was on a route in around Caldwell, Idaho, nesting pair. The one on the right was in Central Oregon. But you can see on the on this one on the right, you can see their markings that you look for are those red colored legs that you see tucked up under his wing there. And then any of the red flashing that you see under the wing like that. And on the back side, when you see them flying, you can tell pretty easily they have these rufous colored ring patches. And they also have a white panel out there by the primaries on the end of their wings. And they flash very clearly when you see them flying. Another thing back here a minute. We've had a few ferruginous hawks in the valley over the years on these routes. One that I had on my route 2 years ago. And when they're standing out in the field, this white chest that you see, it's white. It's brilliant white. And no other bird has that. Red-tailed hawks will have, they'll have a white upper chest and then they'll have the big broad belly band. But this is white and it really stands out. Another bird, another Buteo is a red-shouldered hawk. This is a bird that kind of hangs around in riparian habitat. You're not going to see him out in the middle of open fields that much. And it's a gorgeous bird. Interesting story about this bird. Through the course of the 18 years that we've been doing this survey, we've been able to document their movement basically across the whole state of Oregon. When it started, it was always down in the southwest corner of the state. And then gradually we had some nesting pairs here in Eugene around the reservoir. And now we've seen them on all areas of the state. My wife and I were over in French Glen this past fall, and there was one screaming around in Pea Ranch area. So they're a great pioneer species. And now they're dipping into Idaho because they're starting to pick them up on routes over there. They're a gorgeous bird when you see them in the wild. Very striped colors, that beautiful cinnamon on the chest and the wings, upper wing part, and in the back it's a stark black and white pattern, just like that lower center one. Gorgeous bird. Juveniles are a little bit more blotchier and as you'd expect, but you can see on the flying one that development of the forward color of the wing there is starting to turn cinnamon. Heavily blotched chests. Swainson's hawk, we do have them. They typically move out of the United States en masse to Argentina for the winter. That's their historic pattern of migration. And they're usually gone by end of September. A lot of these guys are over on the east side of the mountains. But here a couple falls ago, guess who found a Swainson's hawk? Thank you, Dan. Right out by Fern Ridge, that area out there on his route. What I want to say here is that the fact that we put these birds that are not supposed to be here into our database is to show pattern. I'm going to say, up front here, I'll bet you in another 30, 40 years as global warming really hits here and things warm up, their key thing is food. And you have cold winters, you're not going to have Swainson's hawks. But as winters progress, they'll get warmer. Prey base is more available. And I would venture to say that we're going to see a lot more of these. We had one last month up in the area outside of Salem. The last two winters, we've had one wintering over in Tillamook area. So we put them in the database because we know they're Swainson's hawks, and it's just proof that things aren't always compartmentalized the way we want it to be. There's three different color phases of Swainson's hawks. Got a light, intermediate, and dark. You'll notice on this here, and this is one characteristic that is good to look at when you're in the field, you can see the wingtips protruding just a little bit past the tail in all three of these birds. I don't know if you can pick that out or not, but they have very long wings and short tails comparatively. And I'll show you a picture here in a minute. This is the same birds flying, same three color phases flying. But this picture I put in here because if you're not careful, you can mistake it for a red-tailed hawk. And one of the things that I do as manager of the data system for this project is if somebody comes through and says, hey, I got a Swainson's hawk, I said, well, hey, you got a picture or you got some written description or something that tells me it's not a red tail. And so that's important to document. A lot of people that do report them have worked with them or have seen them consistently. So, I trust their judgment. When we get outliers, I always ask for backup. White-tailed kites, in reverse, when we had the red-shouldered hawks expanding their territory, something happened to the population of white-tailed kites about 2010, 9, 11, somewhere in that neighborhood. We had some bad winters. I'm not saying that that's the reason why, but we had, you can see here, 55 routes out of the 512 have had white-tailed kites on them. And that's down to about 4 or 5 And one of the things that came out of the statistical analysis I alluded to earlier that the Peregrine Falcon or the Peregrine Fund did was to document not only this drop here in Oregon, but also in California too. So something is happening to the white-tailed kite populations that are getting people like the Peregrine Fund anxious. Hopefully that trend will turn around. We'll start seeing some more. But right now, the best place to go see them is in Coquille, Coos Bay, and Tillamook. Those are the three areas that you can just about count on seeing them. They're gorgeous birds. They used to be called black-shouldered kites for obvious reasons there on the left. And they also hover hunt kind of like a kestrel. And then they'll fold up their wings like a kite and just drop straight down on their prey. And there is a color difference between adults on the left and juveniles on the right. There's a lot of brown on the back and part of the head. But most of them are white. Falcon group, Peregrine Falcon has recovered quite a bit. You'll see almost 50% of the routes have Peregrine Falcons on them. That's pretty amazing, really, when you look at the whole Northwest in total. Again, John Sullivan took this picture. You can notice the steel gray color to their back of their wings and their body. And I remember a story one time when I was taking classwork at OSU. I don't know whether you can see it, but right in the nose hole, on the beak there's a little bony protuberance that sticks up in there. And I was told, and it makes sense. These guys dive at almost 200 miles an hour. And if they didn't have a baffle system in that nose to break up the airflow, they wouldn't get air and they'd probably pass out. So it's a unique thing to have that for good reason. And peregrines they've become quite cosmopolitan. This one on the right was taken actually in the gorge area by the Dalles in more typical falcon habitat. But this one on the left, that backdrop, is the hospital in Bend. And it had a nest there. So, and we have nests on the bridges in Portland. And I had an experience with a peregrine once. I was driving in Portland. I had to stop at a light going up the hill on Burnside. And right in front of me flew a peregrine with a rock pigeon right in his grip. He wasn't more than maybe that high off the ground. And I watched it as he flew down the sidewalk, and there was two people walking, and he flew right past them, and they jumped. They actually jumped. But that has become fairly common in Portland, and they're not afraid of mixing it up with people. But they are wild birds, obviously, and they're bird hunters. Here's a couple of pictures showing different kinds of prey. You see that one bird on the left has two colored bands on its leg. That bird was a captured bird on the coast of Washington. There's a fellow that's been doing banding and studies for decades, and that's one of his banded birds. Then we have the prairie falcon, which is a little bit smaller, a little bit more dainty than a robust size of a peregrine. But the peregrine falcon and the prairie falcon, what I classify as big falcons versus kestrels and merlins, which you'll see a picture of merlin here in a minute. But these are birds of primarily Western Oregon, although I get them every year here in the valley on my routes. But they're mainly a high plains bird. Good characteristic to tell on this is you see that dark stripe coming below the eye, bordered on both sides by white color. That shows up really well in the field. If you see that, you're not. Here's the picture of the peregrine. You can see the difference between their heads. They have a real dainty delicate spotted pattern to their chest. They're more sandy colored, as you can see on the bird on the right. Both of them, you can see those stripes. And when you see a bird flying, you'll notice that the, I'll call them armpits of the wings up against the body. You see those big, heavy black area there. That's indicative of a prairie falcon. And they not only catch birds, but they do catch lots of ground squirrels. I feel sorry for that ground squirrel. Here's a merlin. Merlin's noticeably smaller than a peregrine or a prairie falcon. This one's taken on the beach on some driftwood. They come in 3 different colors: light, dark, and multicolored, as you see there. Heavily striped and banded on the top surface, the tail, belly. And these birds are all business flyers. I don't know whether you've ever seen merlins fly, but they're a point A to point B bird with no hesitation but speed to get there. American kestrels, similar in size, they have a much more buoyant flight to them. But when you see a bullet fly across the field or something, it's going to be a merlin. And then we have what I call the street brawler of the falcons, big gerfalcon. These guys are as big as red-tailed hawks, and they're goose killers. The ones that we get here in the valley, I've been privileged enough to see 8 of them on routes in the past. They're all associated with geese and waterfowl. And the very first one I ever saw flew into a flock of geese and brought it straight to the ground. It was like watching a heat-seeking missile in a fighter pilot chase. You know, it's just amazing. Big, powerful birds. You can see the size of their claws. They're just nothing to mess with. And they have that stripe too, but you see a lot of dustiness on both sides of the stripe. All the falcons have stripes, but in varying degrees of brightness. Here's one thing I wanted to point out in this is how big the tail is. On peregrines and prairie falcons, if you see a bird perched and their wings go all the way down to the tip of their tail, that's what you're looking at. When you're looking at a gerfalcon, you look at this picture like on the right here, that tail tip or the wing tips come way short of the tail tip. And the only thing that you have to be careful of is you don't, you know, at a distance, if you're not paying attention, you could cast this off as a red-tailed hawk at a distance. I know I did it one time, and it was embarrassing. Okay, and then we have, Then we have bird hunters, the accipiters, the Cooper's hawk. If any of you have feeders, maybe you've had one of these guys come in and buzz your feeders for the little birds. These are juveniles here. Sharp-shinned hawk is another accipiter. You notice that this one has a squared off tail versus the Cooper's hawk. I'm going to show you a comparison picture here. These are juveniles. They always have a spotty chest on their chest there. The squared off tail is evident in the one on the right. On the left, they all come down, the tail tips come all down the same. These are all clues that you need to know about when you're trying to determine what you're looking at out there between a sharp-shin or a Cooper's. Sharp-shins are called sharp-shins for a reason. You notice on this right-hand picture how thin and that shin area is. That's why they call them sharp-shins. And here's a comparison picture. The adults of Cooper's hawk and sharp-shin on the outside and the juveniles on the inside. You'll notice another thing to look for is the extension of the tail feathers under the bottom, you know, towards the tail tip. You notice on the Coopers, which is the second picture from the left, that they're staggered up. They don't all come right down to the tip. And that presents a rounded tail configuration when they're flying. Also notice how brightly white the chest is on the juvenile Cooper's hawk versus a smudgy appearance on the sharp-shin. That's because of the size of the streaking and the blotchiness on the, and that's a good field thing to look for when you're looking at birds out in the field. If I see a bright-chested accipiter, I'm thinking Cooper's, and then I'm trying to figure out what it might not be a Cooper's, but go-to is Cooper's. And then the third accipiter is the goshawk. It's kind of like the gyrfalcon of the accipiter species. They're big, tough birds. They'll take out snowshoe rabbits, you know, big fight, you know, big prey. They'll take them. There's an adult on the left, and the juvenile's got a really heavy spotted chest. Then we have osprey. Most osprey leave the state, leave the Northwest, but we do have a few on our routes during the winter time. But they are fish eaters. Here's a couple of sequences of birds looking, diving, and catching fish. There's another one. Then we have 12 species of owls in the project. Great horned owls are the predominant ones because they're early nesters. They nest when the trees don't have leaves on them. And so you can see the nest platforms, and you just look for the two ears sticking up, and you got yourself a great horned owl. The lower right picture is I put that in there to show the camouflage ability. Can you see the second owl in there? It's all the way over on the right there, tucked up behind that branch or that log or the stump. And then here's a picture of a net. This is a little further into springtime. It's outside of the raptor season, but the point is that they do nest. They start their nesting during the time we do our surveys. And the barn owl is it's a surprisingly tough owl to find because they're usually holed up in structures during the daytime. Every once in a while, I catch one out flying. Here's what they look like. The burrowing owl, they're very few and far between during the survey season. They nest up by Pendleton and Tri-Cities area, and big nesting studies going on up there, artificial nesting studies. Some of you have probably read about it. But they winter here. A couple usually winter here every winter. And again, I'm fortunate to have them on my routes. This one on the left was in a snow hole in central Idaho, which was a crazy shot because they shouldn't be around snow by now. This picture here shows banded burrowing owls. The one on the right, the one on the left is from that nesting area up in Pendleton and Tri-Cities. You can see the corrugated tubing that they use for the nesting nest holes, the artificial nest holes. But the one on the right was pretty unique. You can see it's got bands on both legs, and it was banded. This was again on one of my routes. It was banded in Kamloops, British Columbia, and it came all the way down and wintered. It was here for 2 solid months in the same spot on one of my routes in Lane County. If you didn't have the bands on there, you wouldn't have any clues to where those birds are coming from. But this was a unique opportunity to ferret out the band numbers. Pictures that were taken were clear enough from the guy that took them that we were able to read the band numbers and follow up and find out where it was banded. And we got short-eared owls, several here in the valley. And they like upland areas like you see on the right. And they also hang around the marsh. They roost in grassland, marshland areas at night, or in the day, I mean. And they share a roost site with northern harriers. So if you get to a roost site at dusk, you see the short-eared owls coming out and the northern harriers coming in. And there's a lot of aerial display fighting, believe me. It's very active for the time that they switch. Short-eared owls are kind of I call them a flutter flyer, kind of like butterflies. You know, they're very disjointed wing beats. Screech owls are very tough. We don't have very many of those, but we do have some. They're very cryptic. You can hardly see them like this picture here. A couple more shots. Northern pygmy owl. We have quite a few routes with those in it, 66 out of 512. they're tough little hunters. One thing, another anecdote that one of my professors told me about, you see in this lower left-hand picture, the back of the head, you see those two big black eye spots there, what look like, the guy told me, he says, you know, that's to prevent predators from coming up from behind him because they're looking at the predator. Yeah, maybe not, but it's kind of a cool story. These are pretty tough hunters too. They'll take lizards, they'll take birds on the right, and they'll raid nests. This one here was a robin nest that somebody took a picture, a sequence of pictures of a pygmy owl going in and snatching one of the babies. Long-eared owls, very hard to find, very secretive. 14 routes out of all of ours. Same thing with saw-whet owls. Very secretive birds, very tiny. They hide like what you see here in the trees, in the tree branch, notches of the trees. Barred owls. Here's another species like the red-shouldered hawk that's starting to expand that we've been documenting in the project. It's obviously we know what barred owls are here in Oregon, but we're seeing a lot more of them. And in the snowy owl, and I put this picture on the left-hand side to show you the feet and how feathered they are. Obviously, they're a tundra bird, and they are adapted to that kind of thing. Pictures on the right are a rock outcropping up on the Waterville Plateau outside of Wenatchee, Washington. Here's a sequence of an owl taking off out of some weeds on the coast. Great gray owl is our biggest owl in the United States, actually. Not too many, we've only found them on 8 routes. They have big facial discs, big eyes. They like to fly around over snowfields and dive into snowbanks to ferret out the prey that's crawling around underneath the snow. Northern hawk owl, we've only seen one. I was over by Bend, right in the first year of the project, and it was right near a route, which was awesome. It's the only one we have. Oh, let me get this in. This shows you how cosmopolitan that bird was. Yeah. The zone-tailed hawk, we've seen one documented in southeast Idaho. No, that's a picture from the internet. And then, of course, the caracara that we talked about earlier. These are the two that we've seen on the routes that I have. The one on the left was the one here in Corvallis. The one on the right was in a route area in Idaho that I did not have a route set up yet. It was the next year I was able to get a route there, but we didn't get it, so I kept it anyway. And then on these trips that we take on these surveys, sometimes you get to see some really beautiful stuff. This was taken over around Fort Rock area a couple winters ago. It's just gorgeous stuff. There's a red-shouldered or rough-legged hawk hover hunting on the right there. And then spring migration is what yeah, you know that's Photoshop, right? But my friend from Idaho gave that to me, and I said, I got to include this. But spring and March is usually the time when birds start taking off, and that's when we end our surveys. And that's the end. There he goes. I put these two pictures, this picture here showing the two resources that I use that come in really handy. They have a lot of pictures of different color phases and ages and sexes of all the raptor species. Okay, so